Good evening, and welcome to the Sinister Wisdom reading celebrating the launch of Sinister Wisdom 123, A Tribute to Conditions. I am thrilled to have you all joining us here this evening. First, a thank you to Carol Kramer and your girlfriend for the opening song, Peace and Harmony. We'll put more information about the music in the chat after we continue to let the masses of women in for this fantastic event. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Julie Enzer. I am the editor and publisher of Sinister Wisdom, and I am so happy to have you all here with us this evening. As has become our tradition, I spend a moment for a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our programs. We are all located in the United States and around the world, most of us on occupied, unceded land. I am in what is now Dover, Florida, traditional homelands and territories of the Seminole, as well as other historical groups of Native people, including the Calusa and the Takabaga. We pause to recognize the histories of war and colonization and to imagine and work for a world where we have a fair and equitable distribution of resources. If you'd like to type into the chat the land you're located on, we welcome that conversation. We have a chock-a-block hour planned for you with plans to wrap up around 8 p.m. on the East Coast, including time for what is now our traditional dance number at the end. If you're not familiar with Sinister Wisdom, someone recently wrote to me, Sinister Wisdom is really thriving, and I was thrilled to hear that. We are a quarterly journal of lesbian literature and art. If you are not currently a subscriber, I encourage you to sign up for a subscription today by going to sinisterwisdom.org/subscribe. A group of monthly sustainers is vital to Sinister Wisdom. If you are able to give $3, $5, or maybe $100 a month to support our work, you can sign up as a sustainer at sinisterwisdom.org/sustainers. I send out emails every month when sustainer gifts come in with behind the scene details and new information about what we have coming for the journal. Lesbians really showed up for us last fall, and that's what's making our whole year of publishing possible this year. If you believe in and support our work, do become a subscriber, make a donation, and continue to help us be a thriving organization. A few housekeeping notes. As always, please keep your microphone muted throughout the program. If we hear noise, we will mute you ourselves. At the end, we give you an opportunity to unmute and wave and cheer as we dance our way out from the evening. As the program proceeds, if you want to show appreciation for the readers, you can wave your hands at the end of each reading and use the reactions emojis on Zoom. Feel free to go ahead and test that out now. Generally, we invite you all to light up the chat on Zoom. Readers love checking out the chat when they're done reading, and we will download and share the transcript with everyone who is reading this evening and also with the broader community. I want to thank Max Bacher, who has been so helpful in producing these events and is on tap this evening for technical assistance. You can chat with Max if you have technical needs as the evening proceeds. And as you heard coming in, we are recording the event this evening, and we'll make it available starting tomorrow or Thursday at sinisterwisdom.org/SW123. I will put that in the chat. The other thing that I just remembered is I need to enable the live transcript, which I have just done now. I've also learned this week how to make transcriptions on YouTube. And so we will be working through our backlist and also making transcriptions of those. Finally, this issue of Sinister Wisdom is in the mail to all subscribers, but it is wending its way to everyone very slowly. I have not yet received a piece of mail that was mailed to me from about 3 miles away. 2 weeks ago. So our US Post Office continues to struggle, but I do have the greatest confidence that it will be in your mailboxes soon. If you do not have your copy by February 15th, send me an email and I will send you a replacement. There are extra copies of the journal on hand, so if you like what you heard and are not a subscriber, you can order an individual copy or order copies to share with folks. We are mailing out just about 1 day a week, so there's also a slight delay on our end for mail coming out of our office right at this point as a result of ongoing pandemic delays. Now, though, on to our program. As I wrote in the email announcement, this is a wonderful and incredibly special issue of Sinister Wisdom, providing a tribute to the journal Conditions. In addition to the book that we're mailing out, every copy that goes to subscribers has this wonderful postcard that shows all of the covers of Conditions magazine, and is also another way to share the work of this journal with friends and colleagues. So now it's my distinct pleasure to welcome the other two co-editors who worked on this issue. We had a fantastic time, the three of us meeting and putting it together. So please join me in welcoming Shromona Mandal and Cheryl Clarke, co-editors of Sinister Wisdom 123, A Tribute to Conditions.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to see all of you over Zoom. I'm Shromona Mandal, one of the co-editors who worked with Julie and Cheryl on Sinister Wisdom 123. We envisioned our tribute to Conditions to be a generative, intergenerational project reaching back 45 years and bringing Conditions into our present moment and our feminist futures. Surpassing our expectations, this tribute consists of contributions from many of the members of the Conditions editorial collective, as well as 17 reflections on its 17 issues spanning multiple genres and multiple generations. We are so excited to be bringing you Sinister Wisdom 123, A Tribute to Conditions, and celebrating the life and legacy of Conditions, a feminist magazine of writing by women with an emphasis on writing by lesbians. We're going to open up tonight with a reading from Dr. Cheryl Clarke, who, among the many enormous feats of her life, was a longstanding member of the Conditions editorial collective, as well as one of the editors of our tribute issue.
Thank you, Shromona. And this comes up sooner than I had expected, so I'll just act less nervous. Good evening to everyone. And I just want to give my thanks to Julie Inzer, whose creativity and commitment have kept lesbian literary production alive, as well as Sinister Wisdoms. This tribute is your idea. I wish to thank also the 27 contributors to this issue, many of whom are with us tonight. It has been a pleasure to work with you and to work with Shromona as co-editor. As I say in my reflection in the issue, Conditions was a defining moment for me as a Black lesbian feminist. I came to Conditions when Barbara Smith asked me to review Ntozake Shange's book of poetry, Nappy Edges. And then again, when she recommended me to the new editorial collective in 1981, which I'm sure was before many of you were born. It's almost before I was born. Whatever. But I say whatever life I have as a writer, I owe to Barbara Smith and Conditions. Over the 9 years I was with Conditions, I worked with 22 editors and scores of contributors over the course of 8 issues. And so I'm happy to recognize the work of Conditions tonight. I'm turning it back over to you, Shromona. I didn't read from but that's okay. People will read it.
Cheryl, you can if you want to.
I think you should do whatever we need to do. You should read yours.
Why not read yours?
Oh gosh, Blanche, cook. Leave it to you.
Leave it to a butch to bug out. Come on, Cheryl.
Okay, I'll just read a little.
Good. You read so beautifully.
Well, thank you, Blanche. Let me see here. I learned Conditions for me was the defining moment. I had to learn new politics, new skills, new competencies to turn out annually the premier lesbian feminist journal Conditions was. I learned from the 3 founding editors, Elly Bulkin, Clausen, and Rima Shore, who did not suffer fools gladly. Good thing I wasn't a fool. I had a lot to learn. I couldn't look at my own writing or my own life the same again, nor anyone else's writing that I could ever read. A life-changing, never been the same since experience. The exponential impact of 3,000 books a year, whether subscriptions or distribution in bookstores, academic institutions, prisons, mental institutions, public events, cannot be gainsaid. Conditions ended because publications don't last and don't always have to last, though if they are righteous, we wish them to last beyond last. But we are nostalgic things in the worst and better senses. Conditions ended with dignity. She had a good run, a really good run, and the struggle is still before us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's such an honor to hear you reflect on Conditions, and I've been enormously lucky to learn from you and from Julie throughout this process. Julie and Cheryl have also given me my first opportunity to do my first reading for my very first published piece of writing tonight. So get ready for that. For my submission, reflecting on Conditions 10, I wrote a letter to the 1984 editorial collective to convey how Conditions 10 managed to instill hope and courage in me as a young lesbian 36 years after its publication. In this part of my letter, I'm talking about Audre Lorde's criticism of the famous Pentalogue, published in Conditions 9. While Lorde calls in the writers for an unsuccessful attempt at criticism, her letter simultaneously articulates what Black feminist criticism could and ought to be, modeling the very practice it is advocating. I was so excited reading Audre Lorde's response because it displays what conflict within a healthy community looks like. A generous engagement, as opposed to the cold and cut-off act of subtweeting on the internet. Just as Lorde names that, quote, criticism is a learned art, writing letters to confront conflict, publishing letters by the criticized party for the readers to ruminate on, and learning from confrontation are acquired skills. Looking forward to my life in 2020, I am in the process of fleshing out principles and practices with a coalition of student organizers trying to rid our campus of policing. With 3 years of intense and explosive experiences in student organizing, I and others in our organization are coming to the table with a commitment to never avoid conflict and to treat all conflict with care. In other words, making a commitment to fight with and for each other. In her letter, Audre Lorde, whose work and life are studied deeply by prison and police abolitionists, has put a moment of healthy conflict to words. I thank you for publishing it. It has given me the courage to write and to organize with vulnerability and honesty. Skipping ahead, I am also grateful for the thoughtful and reflective response from the editorial collective to Audre Lorde's letter published in the following issue of Conditions. Skipping ahead, fighting with my back to yours, Shromona Mandal. Thank you.
Pretty.
And our celebration of Conditions tonight would be totally incomplete without taking a few moments honoring all of the incredible women who made Conditions 1 through 17 possible. And we hope to do so with a little slideshow featuring some of the archival materials that we gathered. Thank you for that, Max. The slideshow will be available on the Sinister Wisdom website for everyone to view. This has been such an incredible experience working on it and having those names up there. It was really wonderful seeing it all. And a lot of you are in the room, so that's really exciting as well. As you see, we're getting some folks pinned on our screens. We think it's so imperative to share our immense gratitude for the 4 women who founded Conditions in 1976. Elly Bulkin, Jan Clausen, Irena Klepfisz, and Rima Shore. Thank you endlessly for all your work and for being in community with us tonight.
You look great, guys.
Well, hello, editors. Oh, goodness. I'm happy we're able to recognize your work tonight. It's wonderful to see you. You almost look the same.
Not quite.
Not quite.
If only.
Oh, no, I don't want to look the same.
It's true.
Oh, goodness. So we encourage the audience to use the chat to send your good wishes to these 4 wonderful editors who didn't suffer fools gladly. So Shromona, where can we go from here?
Do you want to introduce our next reader?
Oh, we do have a number of contributors who are going to read from their work, their contributions to the issue tonight. The first reader will be my fellow editor, Mariana. I hope you're ready, Mariana. Mariana Romo Carmona. Let me, wait a minute, don't start yet now. I have to read your bio because you know, you sent it to me. Mariana Romo Carmona, Neoyorquina, born in Chile, joined Conditions as an editor for issues 15 to 17. She has taught creative writing, Spanish, and comparative literature for many years, and she currently teaches Latinx studies at City College in New York. She is the author of a novel, short fiction, and poetry, including Living at Night and Speaking Like an Immigrant. Mariana.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here. And I promised you I wouldn't cry, so I won't. Okay?
Please don't now.
Oh, no. None of that. None of that. This past year, when I wrote about Conditions 14 for Sinister Wisdom, I kept coming up against the realization that the staggering achievement of the publication was also the achievement of women writers fighting against hate, misogyny, racism, and homophobia. I began with the recognition of having been beaten in many ways in my life, and that this body that I propel in resistance against that violence is part of that movement against hate. That movement against hate becomes a way of thinking about self-hate, a soul searching against the violence of our times revealed by our resistance in the very specific context of publication processes. I connected the production of writing that is an interstitial enunciation from a position beyond political and artistic margins because it is a position without territory, una poética de destierro, or exiled poetics. I compare our fight to that of Carlos de Roca, an unknown Chilean poet from the vanguard era of the 1930s, against his schizophrenia and his queerness, a poet whose fluid sexual sensibility made him strange and unwieldy to those around him, and whose poetry failed to achieve the solidity of well-edited books or the solidity of a normative poetics. The critique of his work invariably returns to a critique of the individual, talented but undisciplined, failing to meet standards, and the demand for an untroublesome excellence. In my analysis, I think how often this was a fight against self-hate, the flight of that I towards refuge, toward peace, toward a free expression of life and passion. Yet giving up that I, that subject, surrendering the self, projecting beyond toward self-exile and suicide. I remember my own past and the work of third world women activists of the late 70s. That's how we identified ourselves. The early 80s, lesbians of color, writers, poets, artists, lesbian mothers like me who had the mothering taken out of them, their children removed, immigrants who had their lands ripped from them, desterradas who lost their language and their energy in the struggle to speak. I remember the effort to produce a work, a text, to publish a magazine, to start a press, to gather an anthology, and how difficult it was to write on time, to write in time, to meet deadlines, to fill out grant proposals, to edit books under hate. Invariably, we were late. Some of us failed to achieve the solidity of well-edited books, of normative poetics, the cleanliness of a good draft. And one by one, we would lose another sister to pain, to anger, to depression, to madness, to illness, but we hardly ever named that which was buried within. At times we raged against each other because there was no one else to rage against, one who would hear us. Back in the day of print, when editors did not wait, presses did not stop, book distributors were unaware of flights of the self. We ourselves expelled each other from ourselves for being late, for not showing up, for not meeting deadlines. Invariably, they were critiques of the individual, talented but undisciplined, failing to meet standards. Many of us had no degrees or steady jobs, and the ones who did gave up their hearts for them, their children or their loves, their accents or the way they moved, becoming no longer strange or unwieldy. Not showing up and not meeting deadlines, yet managing to publish our contradictions as more of us souls under fire, marked by color and skin and features and many gendered, stepped on the ground where pain was buried, stood on the shoulders of many to publish our words. We stayed up for nights into dawn, unable to write, unable to finish, because that struggle against ourselves, against finishing the well-edited manuscript, was the only way to carve out a piece of time for ourselves, a minute of time carved out of flesh to build territory out of surrender, out of giving up, out of self-exile, projecting out beyond life of a life to own. That was a struggle we won against hate. In Conditions, and this is what I wrote, it is possible to trace from the very first issue the poems by Black women, the first poems by women identifying as Jews, as lesbians, as poets born in Greece or Italy or Cuba, the first reviews of books by Black writers, the first poems that contain names of places and parts of the world other than the United States, the first words and languages other than English, including the first poem printed in Spanish in Conditions 1, even if all the accents were entered by hand upon the typeset letters. But it is true that few of us survive. And I want to thank the ones among us who pulled us through and who are working still. Ashe and Amulepe, que siga nuestra lucha.
Beautiful, Mariana. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Saraellen Strongman is an assistant professor of Afro-American and African Studies at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. She researches and writes about Black feminisms, Black women's political and cultural history, and African American literature. Her manuscript in progress, The Sisterhood, Black Women, Black Feminism, and the Women's Liberation Movement, examines the moment when Black women critics, poets, and writers lay the groundwork for what we know now as Black feminist thought. Her work has been published in Feminist Theory and is forthcoming in Feminist Studies. She will be our next reader.
Thank you, Shromona. And thank you so much to Shromona and Julie and Cheryl for their incredible work on this special issue. And I'm so honored to be a part of it. In this issue, I responded—
1 second, Saraellen, I'm trying to find you to pin you. I want everyone to be able to see you.
I thought I was pinned.
She is pinned.
Sorry.
She's pinned. Sorry. Saraellen.
I'll just wait till Julie tells me I'm okay.
I know, because you don't want to get on her bad side.
I do not.
It's all fine. All good.
So as I said, I responded to Conditions 9. Julie very generously sent the contributors their own hard copies of the issues they wrote about. So Conditions 9 was published in 1983, and the piece that I'm going to read from today is titled No More Nice Girls. And I take the title from an exchange from this pentalogue that Shromona referenced earlier. So Bonnie Johnson says to Cheryl Clarke, "Could we be a little nice?" And Linda Powell says, "No more nice girl." This exchange follows Cheryl Clarke and Jewelle Gomez's critiques of Toni Morrison's award-winning third novel, Song of Solomon, as having, quote, so much garbage in it, and being full of, quote, floating debris, respectively. These statements are shocking now, but were even more so in 1983 in the still relatively early days of Black feminist criticism. Although Alice Walker's The Color Purple would win both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award that year, there remained a reticence among Black women to publicly criticize Black women's writing. That the criticism appeared in conditions meant that participants were airing their dirty laundry in front of outsiders, i.e. white people, more specifically white women. The contradictions and controversy of the Penologue, or the 5-person conversation, so named by the members who participated in it, Black women writers on Black women writers in Conditions 9, reflects the rapidly evolving nature of Black feminist criticism in the 1980s and the role that Conditions played in its growth and dissemination. Although Conditions was founded by 4 white lesbians who we are so lucky to have in attendance here today, it ended up becoming a major site for the growth and articulation of Black lesbian feminist criticism. This was due in part to the founding editors' commitment to diversity. They wanted to make sure that they were including a wide variety of voices and authors across ethnicities, class statuses, and races. And this includes, of course, notably the 5th issue, the Black Women's issue, which was special edited by Barbara Smith and Lorraine Bethel. In 1982, the editorial collective was reconfigured. Elly Bulkin and Rima Shore continued on as editors and were joined by 5 new members, including 3 Black women, Jewelle Gomez, Carol Oliver, and Cheryl Clarke, 1 Latina, Mirtha Gonzalez, and the only Southerner, Dorothy Allison. Conditions 9 was the first issue published by this new multiracial editorial collective. The new composition of the editorial collective generated new dynamics and tensions. The contents of issue 9 reflect these anxieties about this inclusive project, both in the magazine and in the broader feminist movement. Would the newly assembled editorial collective be able to work together successfully, or would personal and systemic challenges stymie their vision for the magazine? In particular, the conversation among Jewelle Gomez, Cheryl Clarke, Evelyn Hammonds, Bonnie Johnson, and Linda Powell reflects the changes that had taken place in the larger feminist movement, and in particular in multiracial and Black feminist movements in the years since Conditions 1 was published in 1977. The Penologue voices the anxieties and the joys of a Black feminist criticism in the 1980s. In the introduction, Clarke describes the inspiration for the conversation as deriving from the ambivalence they all felt about their work as Black feminist critics, both how they might impose a Black feminist framework onto all Black women's writing, and how their work published in white feminist publications exposed themselves and all Black women to the prying eyes of outsiders. Clarke frames the conversation as an attempt to work through the dilemma of exposing family secrets, and reveals that they attempted to, quote, create an atmosphere of anything can be said, unquote, during the taping to combat their urge to self-censor. What plays out in this conversation is a shared attempt to limn the contours of a developing tradition. As Linda Powell noted, quote, what we're doing is a new bird. Rather than presenting a unified, internally coherent vision of Black feminist criticism and art, the participants in the Penologue openly critique other Black women writers. There is a tension between the excitement these women feel about the growing availability of writing by Black women and their frustration with its quality and how the tokenization of Black women's literature seemed to limit its growth. At the same time, the participants rejoiced at each new title authored by a Black woman. They refused to stay complacent. Their joy at the increasing availability of works by and about Black women did not prevent them from criticizing the work of other Black women writers. Most severely judged in this conversation are Bell Hooks and Ellen Shockley and literary scholar Deborah McDowell. Also at issue in this conversation were the consequences of critique for the participants' personal lives. Although it was growing, the community of Black feminists, especially Black lesbian feminists, was still relatively small at this time. The relationships between Black feminists were precious. Clarke describes her dilemma as a critic this way, quote, the question becomes for me in many cases not what am I to say, but rather, can I say what I need to say and still keep my friendships? Black feminists struggle to balance the rigor of their analysis and their desire for community. These anxieties were, of course, confirmed, as Shromona told us, when Audre Lorde penned a letter published in Conditions 10 in response to the Penalog, which saying that she felt it contained personal attacks and produced destruction, rather than an assessment of the current state of Black women's writing, as the title promised. Looking at the Penalog alongside the other contents of the issue further illuminates the controversy and the richness of this moment in history. Conditions 9 also contains reviews of Audre Lorde's biomythography Zami and the anthology All the Women Are Right, All White, All the Men Are Black, But Some of Us Are Brave. Clarke and other participants in the Penalog had a much more nuanced view of the anthology, ironically, than the Conditions review espoused. Both in the Penalog and overall in the issue, we see a Black feminist canon information and just how rich and varied that criticism was at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful. Audrey was right, but so were we. Is Jewelle Gomez ready?
Yes.
Well, let me introduce you, Jewelle. Jewelle Gomez is a very old friend of mine, and I hope I can find her. If not, she'll have to introduce herself.
You can make it up.
No, I didn't want to do that.
Ah, you should.
Just a minute, everybody. We do have a little time. Shromona and I cut some stuff so that we could make more time. Jewelle Gomez is the author of the Gilda Stories. She became a Conditions Collective member in 1981 at the same time as I did. She served until 1983, I believe, when she went to the council, New York State Council on the Arts, and shepherded us through many funding cycles. As I said, she is the author of the double Lambda Literary Award-winning novel, The Gilda Stories, as well as the playwright in residence at New Conservatory Theater Center, which has produced her work about James Baldwin, Waiting for Giovanni, and her play about Alberta Hunter, Leaving the Blues. Jewelle Gomez.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you, everyone. As I wrote in the chat, this is like better than my college reunion, actually. So in preparing the piece, when I wrote it for this anniversary celebration issue, it reminded me of how difficult things were for lesbians in the 80s and late 70s and 80s. The amount of violence against lesbians on the street was just continuous, and we don't have facts about it because nobody bothered to count it. But it happened quite regularly, and many lesbians, like myself, never felt particularly safe, particularly in New York, which had in the 80s the highest 1980s, the highest crime rate in New York City's history. It also reminded me of how young we were at the time, really young and experienced, if not totally in years. So that's all came up for me as I was writing. When I left home, Boston, in 1971, I was mostly alone in New York City. It felt as magical as I'd imagined it would, but I seemed to be watching the excitement through a window from somewhere outside. I finally realized that when I left Boston, I'd also left behind my first and only lover, a girlfriend I'd had for 4 years. before she married a man. So I was alone in a profound way that I hadn't been able to articulate, yet I knew there were other lesbians out there somewhere. I understood I wasn't just looking for a new girlfriend, I was searching for a community of lesbians so I could feel at home again and feel safe. When I moved into a flat on the Upper West Side, I was right near Woman Books, and I haunted the bookstore so often. Karen, the owner, probably thought I lived there, but she introduced me to Marilyn Hacker and Sharon Olds, and they invited me to help program their poetry series at the bookstore. And it was on the shelf at that bookstore that I first saw Conditions magazine. Later, when the founding collective included me in their invitation to a new group of lesbians to join them, I was astounded by my good fortune. I mean, I was already devoted to the poetry of Irena Klepfisz, so that I was going to find out I was going to sit in the same room with her. I was kind of speechless. On the morning of that initial meeting, I was extremely nervous for a bunch of reasons, in addition to that one I just mentioned. First, I had to take a subway train to Brooklyn. And even though I had been in New York for a while, I was still a small town girl. And I don't know that I had ever taken the subway to Brooklyn from Manhattan. Another reason that I was really nervous was that the editorial collective was all white. And even though I enjoyed the magazine and I thought they did a fabulous job, I, again, being kind of Boston is a small town, I imagined that the collective would be all of these sophisticated New Yorkers. They'd all be wearing black, and they'd have black, huge earrings and huge vocabularies, and that I was really going to look like a schlub. But the biggest anxiety for me was that they were all editors. And as most writers know, the word editor can strike terror in your heart. The other kind of oddity about this was it was a Sunday afternoon gathering with a group of women who were total strangers. So it was kind of like going to a cocktail party, not knowing a soul in the room, and there would be no cocktails. So I was really a little anxious. I remember taking a deep breath before I walked in and into Dorothy Allison's flat. And I was still, again, as I said, a profound New Englander, so I couldn't imagine what I was going to say to a Southern white gal as I walked into her home. It seemed like a setup for a bad joke or a bad racial incident. But I tamped down my fear and focused on the fact that I was sitting in a room full of lesbians, something I'd been hoping for desperately since I'd arrived in New York City. And not just random lesbians, but lesbians who, like me, were enthusiasts for women's liberation and for writing. I really don't remember the format of the meeting. I don't remember much about the meeting at all, except of course I do remember Cheryl Clarke. I also remember, as time went on, how much I learned from each of the current editors as they were teaching us how to edit our own work and how to edit others' work. I remember how much Elly Bulkin guided me when I began to write the Gilda stories. The Conditions experience for me was like taking a graduate course in lesbian literature and radical social change. In the years since that beginning, Dorothy Allison and I have laughed often about that first meeting. She was nervous about the dreadlock, serious-faced gal sitting on her couch. And I couldn't take my eyes off of the chains hanging as curtains on the doorway to her living room. And from that moment was spawned a lifelong friendship. Condition turned out to be the place where a door opened, and I found myself invited into a world I'd only glimpsed from outside. The delicate process of being part of a lesbian feminist collective has remained with me through the years. Whenever I set out to do work in collaboration with others, I think of how we managed to exchange passionate ideas with so little rancor. And I definitely go back to how we negotiated with Audrey to send a letter to us rather than cancel her subscription. And it was really exciting to be the better feminist than Audrey. Whenever anti-feminists or just people who think they're cool make fun of collectives, encounter groups, potlucks, or white feminists, I'm unable to remain silent. Feminism still remains the first political movement that articulated racial and gender equality as intrinsics to its goals. 40 years later, I value that sense of community, the intentional work that must go into making it, and the intricate political perspective on equality I came to understand while working on the Conditions Collective. The most recent eruptions of anger following the barrage of police attacks and killings in our communities of color has sparked other movements to change the course of history and the shape of our culture. The lingering COVID-19 pandemic has also further nudged us in odd ways toward change. The organized responses in both situations are possible in part because of the lesbian feminist organizing that came before. This could be a moment as ripe for reformation of this country as was the period following the Civil War. But it remains to be seen if we have the endurance to see that the pages be rewritten and a new world be rebuilt. Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you, Jewel. Thank you very much.
What a bunch.
Thank you so much, Jewel. Barry Borish is the author of Apocalypse Darling, her memoir Body Geographic, which won a Lambda Literary Award, and her book-length essay My Lesbian Husband, which won the Stonewall Book Award. She is a professor at DePaul University, where she directs the interdisciplinary LGBTQ studies minor and edits Slag Glass City, a journal of the urban essay arts. She will be our next reader.
Hi, everyone. I am just so completely honored to be a part of this. I am here as a fan, as a reader. I also just want to set this up by saying that, you know, I teach a class at DePaul on the American Literary Magazine that's in conjunction with the magazine Slag Glass City that I edit. And what we do is we look at archives of magazines across time. And there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of, you know, scholarship on literary magazines, but big surprise, right? They always leave out the feminists and the queer magazines. And so I invented my own unit for that. And I bring them these magazines. I bring them Conditions and Heresies and Sinister Wisdom. I have an interview with Julie that I have as part of my class. And the students are amazed. They're amazed. They have no idea how long these conversations have been going on. And it just always makes me so happy that I have carried those magazines like through every move and finally found a place to kind of bring them back into my teaching world. I'm going to read a short piece, just a few pages from my piece called We Live in History Differently. Mine is more of a memoir. We Live in History Differently on Conditions 11 and 12. I don't remember when or where I first saw an issue of Conditions, but I started reading the magazine in the early 1980s, so I was still in my early 20s. I was a still forming queer woman who left the industrial realms of Chicago to reinvent herself. Now I see I was considering my geography, my class, my whiteness, and the forms of my desires, though at the time all I knew was that I was trying to shake off an unnameable chokehold. I first remember reading the magazines in my terrible, beautiful old upstairs duplex in South Minneapolis, the same apartment where I fell in love with a woman for the first time. I was working for a small semi-collective feminist theater company, writing publicity copy. I'd had sex with a few women, pined after a few more, but it was in this apartment where I studied those little lesbian magazines and made the full turn. My new lover with the dark curly hair and I huddling in bed, cringing and laughing while the telephone rang and rang. My last cis male lover calling frantically, even though he knew I didn't pick up, because I was finally doing what we'd both known I was preparing to do, leave him for a woman. My last year in the apartment was the year Conditions 11-12, the double issue, 1985, came out. Reading through it again now, 35 years later, I'm struck by the formative picture it provides of the atmosphere of my life back then. Not who I was yet fully, but the human I aspired to be. So many of the stories and conditions were about women finally leaving men for women, lovers, women breaking away from abuse, women grappling with racism, poverty, government. So many of the poems were about bars, bodies, politics, sexual violence, addiction, lust. So many of the essays and reviews were passionate and accessible works of first-person political theory. There has been no other time in my life, including graduate school and years of teaching and creative writing programs, where what I was reading, writing, creating in my workplace and discussing with my friends was all part of a common and evolving fabric. That wreck of an apartment, it probably should have been condemned, but then seemed to me luxuriously spacious. Had a living room where I'd hung frayed lace tablecloths over the windows and placed the round, large end of a telephone wire spool set on cinder blocks in the center. My friends from the theater, mostly lesbians, if not yet, then soon to be, gathered around that table, sitting on swaying chairs I bought for a few bucks at one of those old junk stores that used to be everywhere, laughing and getting high, but also talking through all we believed and desired. My bed was a futon on the ground in the middle of the circular apartment, my desk a door on cinder blocks set in a sunny alcove corner overlooking the street. I used an electronic typewriter, the kind with that tiny one-line computer screen to revise poems, a couple of which I would publish in little feminist journals in coming years, and many more I would discard. Most of what I was doing then was educating myself. I read articles by sex-positive and anti-racist lesbian feminist theorists, and on yellow pads wrote drafts of poems and long letters to friends back in Illinois. I had dropped out of college at 20 and spent the next half-decade putting together another kind of education altogether, key to the writer I am today, and the literary magazines I read, Sinister Wisdom, Heresies, and Conditions, were my core curriculum. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you, Barry. That was incredible. Thank you for saying yes when I emailed you about contributing to this issue. I want to make two announcements before we have our final reader. And the first is our Sinister Wisdom Book Club meets next week at the same time, Tuesday night at 7 p.m. We're talking about Zoe Whittall's The Spectacular, which I just read this weekend. And I think it is a spectacular book. And so we'll be talking about it next week with the book club, which is a small and hearty group of folks. And we have a great time talking about our lesbian perspectives on books. The second thing is we've added an event in February near the end of the month on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to have a director conversation with Jacqueline Rhodes, who just did the movie Always a Fury. I think that's the title of it. It's a documentary about the Furies, and it's going to be great fun. And we'll have a special advanced viewing for Sinister Wisdom folks before that conversation. So I hope you'll join us for that. Thank you to everyone who has read this evening, to everyone who contributed to this fantastic issue of the journal. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dorothy Allison. I'm going to read from Dorothy's bio so that I do not either fangirl or say something so utterly profane I will not be able to come back from it. Dorothy Allison, now in her 70s, remains a stubborn lesbian writer and activist. Her books include ones that we all love: Bastard Out of Carolina, Trash, Two or Three Things I Know for Sure, Skin, and Cave Dweller. She has a vast archives of photographs, books, journals, and ephemera from other lesbian writers and activists that keep her relatively sane. Please join me in welcoming Dorothy Allison.
I'm glad you said relatively, because I don't think I was sane. God, it's great to see your faces. Oh, brave new world. Fuck. All right. I had this, it's sometimes hard to think about 40 years. Christ Jesus, 40 years. You don't look that different, Jewelle. You look very much the same, and God damn, you all look much the same. But now I'm wearing granny glasses, which are the really big ones, so you can see as much, because without the glasses, I'm practically blind. And I look at you and I want to cry, because I went to New York as a stubborn, angry, Southern lesbian feminist. I had lived in Washington, D.C. for 3 years, and I worked at Quest. You might not know Quest, where I learned to be an editor. And I learned how to argue politely. Now, I know how to do scorched earth arguing, but you can't do that at a literary magazine and come back next week and read a different story. And if you are a writer, and I don't know that any of you have ever thought about this, but if you're a writer and you start talking trash that people can quote, the people that are going to hear what you said are going to do a review of your work, and you're going to be exposed to the world as a piece of shit. I knew that as soon as I joined the staff of Quest, I was stepping into dangerous territory. Also, I found some of the editors sexually interesting, and I had to learn not to express that. It's like you grow up poor and you step into a world of people who are not poor, and there is an entire standard of behavior. In a lesbian feminist literary world, that standard of behavior is rigid, enforced with shame and contempt, and just as nasty as non-political heterosexuals when they get ticked off. But I don't fall in love with heterosexuals. And I have never worked with other writers that I did not on some level fall in love with them. The glory and the horror of being a writer and an editor is you can't hide. I thought when I became a writer that I would live in a maybe not pleasant or even necessarily very clean, tiny apartment in Manhattan, and I could hide out as a writer. You cannot do that as a lesbian feminist writer. You are not invisible. All of you know this. It's not like you can write a story about your ex-girlfriend and she ain't gonna show up at the magazine meeting and accuse you of being a liar and a fool. I actually missed that detail, although it did happen to me when I was working at Quest. But I fell in love. I have way too exotic sexual taste to take up with other editors when I work with people. But that doesn't stop me from falling in love with people taking enormous risks as writers and editors. And God damn, Quest, Conditions, Sinister Wisdom, the level of risk, the level of humiliation, the level of desire, not only for women, but for the glory of being able to write well and be appreciated and look into people's eyes and see she did read it. She's not just putting me on. She read it. She understood it. Oh, God. So I did write. All right. When the first evacuation order came in, we started packing the truck and the car with everything we imagined might be necessity. We figured we were going to wind up somewhere south in some shelter, or more likely in a parking lot at Walmart, carrying our notebooks coffee, blankets, a bag of clothes, and oh God, yeah, a whole bunch of books. There were notebooks, there were sheets of paper, things clipped together with paperback books holding them in place, all of that stuff. But the bottom line is we were jumbled and confused. There was fire to the south of us. There was fire to the north. We had already gone through flood season, and that had been bad enough. Everybody up on our hill had been evacuated. We had sneaked past the highway patrol to get back to the house because we've been here for 25 years. We know the river. We know what happens. We were pretty sure that if we didn't get back fast, people with pickup trucks, some of them possibly related to me, would be showing up to empty the house. So we went back by sneaking past the highway patrol. Also, I was afraid. I was raised poor. I was raised with damn little. We had put together a life. We had put together the really important stuff: books, journals, magazines, 2 sets of conditions, all the sets that I had of Sinister Wisdom. Yes, heresies. Yes, all those magazines in which voices were trying to do what I was trying to do, which was write something meaningful and share it with the world. I could not stay away. I am a materialistic bitch. I want what I want and I want to keep it. But also letters and notes and copies of a story Jewelle showed me before she did the Gilda book. Stories that Cheryl would share. Cheryl don't share easy. People I respected, worshiped, on some level just fucking adored. It was glory. It was glory in magazines. It was glory in letters. It was glory in tapes. And back then it was all little tapes, not CDs. All of that material of a life of determination and activism. And I, God damn it, wasn't going to let it get burned away or flooded out or hauled off. I'm 72 now. I know how the damn fool I was to think you could keep anything, that on some level you take it in, you breathe it, you live with it, and you better be ready to let it go, especially the fire. But we were hauled off into the pickup truck. We were carrying a box of journals, 2 boxes of conditions. I was carrying Sinister Wisdom. I was pulling everything out. I had blank notebooks. I had notebooks that were full. I looked at the spines of the conditions, and every time I looked at them, it was like I fell back 40 years. I fell back to that morning in my apartment where all these people of whom I had heard, some of them I hadn't met, but who I, on some level, I was in love with them. The moment they came in, I had worried myself sick with what do you provide for lesbian feminist activist writers? You can't just bake a cake and put it out. You got to do something good. And Jewelle had been talking about pot roast. I have a terrible pot roast. I'm not a good cook of that meat. But I was ready to make a pot roast just for Jewelle. I was ready. I did not want to be loved. I wanted to be part of the tribe I believed in. I was ready to bleed. I was ready to embarrass myself. I was ready to do anything to make those other editors, those real editors, not just stubborn, determined, pitiful girls trying to do something of worth, people who knew what they were doing. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was going to do it anyway. And the editors of conditions, scary Elly Bulkin, Jesus Christ. Gorgeous Jan Clausen, Jesus Christ, Irena, oh God. If it would have helped, I'd have made a pot roast, but I'm better with chicken. And there was just as much determination to be frank and open and risk in their faces as I hoped showed in mine. I hoped. Scared shitless. Scared shitless. That's what I remember by sitting on the floor talking to the other people. I was scared shitless and I was not going to show it. I was going to be determined and I was going to be literary. I'm not quite sure at that time, and I knew what literary meant, but God damn it, I had some stories I thought maybe I could manage. This is the thing. I had this clerical job in Midtown Manhattan. Every day I went back and forth on the subway. always with a big old bag and a backpack. I was like a homeless person going back and forth carrying shit. And the trick was that I got the subway from Manhattan and I got off down on 3rd Street and the post office was right there. So I was the person that picked up the mail when I joined the editorial staff. That appeared to be my primary responsibility since I was not so confident in my editing skills. I could get the mail from the post office, load my bag, stagger home with vast quantities of manuscripts and glory, review copies. You guys know what I'm talking about. You're poor. You're making your way in Manhattan. You're barely surviving. You ain't got no extra cash. And people are sending books to the magazine. Review copies. I went blind. Everything. I mean, I would get it to the office and I'd get it to the office pretty quick, but I'd read it first. It was like suddenly becoming rich. All those books. And what's more, books I wanted to read, books by lesbians, books by feminism, books of startling criticism that was written with a sense of love, with a sense of purpose. I had already volunteered with a couple of little Manhattan magazines and they were hateful. The boys were competitive and contemptuous and they're like, are you going to talk about that lesbian stuff? And hell, you damn right I am. That ate my soul. But going to the meetings for conditions, carrying the books I had already kept for a few days and read, walking in and seeing Jewelle and seeing these people who were absolutely trustworthy, broke my heart that I had not already found them. It broke my heart that we were almost barely managing in a sense of resistance to the culture all around us. 40 years ago, people were hateful. I got chased home from the subway one night. This son of a bitch yelling, "You're a dyke, I can tell you're a dyke." And I got home shaking. And I picked up the bag of books that I had gotten from the post office and just sat down on the floor and started reading. Saved me, kept me from killing myself or somebody else. I think it's hard to acknowledge how much wonder I took in being an editor for Conditions. The risk, the sense of fear, the presence and struggle just to stay sane while reading so much that was unknown to me. Conditions, the work we did is a glory. I am proud of it. But I got to tell you, the education that I got, the access to people and stuff and music and talk, the level of conversation, the level of women willing to take risks to say possibly stupid or, and not feminist enough stuff. Do you remember not being feminist enough? Christ Jesus. Okay, I wasn't feminist enough. What was it like? What was it like walking into that room? Bagels, coffee, people's faces, all of them scared as I was. Some of them writers, some of them saying they weren't writers, they were just editors, but that was a lie. They were faking to cover if they might not be good enough yet. All of them were writers. All of them. Elly Bulkin was scary. I don't know if you ever met Elly early on, but she was terrified. And all I was doing was like nodding and agreeing with anything she said. You ain't gonna fight Elly at the first couple of meetings. Took me almost a year to start fighting Elly. And even then I was careful. I wasn't sure she wouldn't just call me out on my ignorance. Well, actually she did call me out on my ignorance. And that was a good thing because I had a certain amount of ignorance that needed correction. God, oh, Rima, Jan. Some of them came to a reading I did in Lower Manhattan. I almost pissed myself. It was like I had my life separated, really separated. There was my job. I worked for poets and writers. I ran the information center. I answered phone calls from all over the country saying, yes, you can be a writer. This is how you start. You start. I was kind of a blunt person. I was going to the new school studying anthropology. That was my backup plan. I was going to become Margaret Mead for a modern generation. Didn't quite work out that way. Didn't quite work out that way. I had insomnia. I wrote all the time. I wrote in notebooks. When I discovered computers, I thought, fuck, but that was relatively later. And I did some nefarious things to acquire computers. We'll talk about that in some other meeting. What else? And Jewelle. God. I remember meeting Jewelle at that first gathering and looking at her. And Jewelle has this thing she does with her eyes, which is she takes her head back and she looks at you. And you are scared out of your mind because she's smart. I'm going to say something that I know is off past the level. I'm smart. I got out of my wretched family. I got out of poverty. I got out of sexual implications. I got out of goddamn college professors who said, oh, you're going to provide the feminist narrative in this class. Get shit in your mouth and walk away, man. I'm going to kill you. But then just smile. I was raised in the South. I can smile at people I'm planning to kill later. But you couldn't do that. You couldn't do that in the editorial meetings for Condition. You couldn't look at people with hatred. They were taking huge risks with you. They were telling you things about their lives. We were arguing about stories as if stories were important. I had always believed stories were important. God damn. God damn. And you learned things talking to other lesbian feminists. You learned things you better be careful with. People were putting their hearts open. People were telling secrets. People were taking enormous risks. People who had never even implied that they wanted to write would bring in drafts of stories and ask you to read them. The risk, the trust. And people would tell you you were a fool. Black women would tell you you were racist. And you were like ready to defend yourself, except take a breath. You are racist. You were raised by your wretched, goddamn, hateful stepfather and cousins you loved who were cousins who were hateful, and you knew they were hateful, and you loved them anyway. I think that one of the ways in which we are shaped as women, as writers, as editors and feminists is that experience of talking to people like yourself who wanted what you wanted with trust, and then stepping back and thinking about your family. With all their hatefulness and all their jealousy and rage. People you loved who humiliated you by even talking in the presence of people you also loved. Do you know that I'm talking about? Becoming lesbian feminist writers and editors. You stepped into this other world, but you didn't get out of the world you came out of. You carried all that stuff with you, and you had to live with what you discovered in yourself. Conditions was the place I could acknowledge being scared and hateful when I was being scared and hateful, and knowing that the other women would listen to me and not just automatically fight and attack me, but listen to me, share their stuff, and then we could really get some work done. And oh my God, the work we got done. Oh my God. Getting letters from writers that you had been reading for a decade and loving, and then they wanted to publish something in your little magazine, and you were going to have to work with them as an editor. You were a damn fool if you didn't acknowledge that you were in awe of them. But if you went into too much detail about being in awe of them, that pretty much kills the editorial relationship. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And finding out the wounds that you inflict on other people because you were an ignorant shit. You are. Just being a young writer, your ignorance shows in everything you do, and you have to take a breath and live with that if you want to be any good. And God, I've always wanted to be good. I've been bad often enough. What do I want to tell you that is important? Oh, editorial meetings. There is nothing in the world like editorial meetings. We eat too much. We rage too much. We didn't drink, not at editorial meetings. And every once in a while you had to say, I can't talk about her work. Well, why can't you talk about her work? Because I slept with her 3 weeks ago and I just don't feel trustworthy in anything I'd say about her. I don't know actually who else in the editorial meetings were sleeping around, but I was. And you got to be a little careful. You know what I'm talking about, guys? You have to be a little careful, and you have to acknowledge your weaknesses, and you have to acknowledge where you have fucked up. The best thing that ever happened with me was acknowledging how I had fucked up, and people in the room would just, and go on to the work. It made the work possible. It made the work glory. So I'm in this hard position of being a lesbian mother of a boy. That child has had a hard life. Then again, raising him, I've had a hard life. Every once in a while, I think back 40 years when I was just on the edge of being a complete lesbian feminist separatist. Do you remember separatism? The world is different. I am different. I've raised a feminist son. God damn, I didn't even know that was possible 40 years ago. I love every goddamn magazine I worked for. I loved every woman on the editorial staff. I loved staggering home with piles of books and sorting through them and thinking, I can't keep this. I got to take it to the editorial meeting. Somebody else is going to read it and they ain't no richer than I am. I love being afraid. I have a tendency in that direction anyway. And I love being forgiven. And I love all of you. I love you new babies that have come in and are taking the risk. It's worth it. It's worth it. Some of the people I love most in the world were editors at Conditions. And right behind them, some of the people I love most in the world were those baby writers that sent in those dangerous, scary attempts at being writers. Do you know what I'm talking about? It ain't the world giving you an award. It ain't even money, although money is safe and important, and I acknowledge that I need money. It is the wonder of joining a community and feeling native to that community. And, you know, let's be clear. If you are a lesbian feminist writer and editor, you have to be completely frank about all of your failures as a person. Because people who you work with are going to tell you all the shit you've fucked up about. And they too are going to love you. And the great glory is working with young writers who come back to you and say, I'm a writer because you did this, or I read that and it made me want to write. All those little baby children risking their lives and their sanity and writing glorious stuff. It goes on. I am thrilled that it goes on. I am thrilled that Sinister Wisdom is there. I'm thrilled how Conditions ended also because people took responsibility. Write me something new, children. I'm not finding enough right now. But I know there are seasons in this stuff. There are seasons. What I'm looking forward to is some baby writer is going to read an issue of Conditions or something that I wrote and get all ticked off. She don't know what she's talking about. And then they'll write something and I can be humiliated in public. And then we can forgive each other in that ancient feminist process in which invariably bagels are shared. Next generation. Right. I treasure magazines. I treasure editors. I treasure the work of editorial process. But write me stuff. I don't think that it is. I don't think it's a good idea to not write when you are an editor for these kinds of magazines. You have to be part of the community. You have to engage and you have to take risks. And being an editor who doesn't write, you have to work even harder to take risks and not fuck up completely. I can remember 40 years ago, oh, what is that thing? We'd be sitting on the floor eating. We ate a lot. This is the process of maintaining energy in editorial meetings. Sitting on the floor in my big old half-empty apartment in Brooklyn with stacks and stacks of paper. You know how we used to judge manuscripts? You'd be reading and sitting in a circle and you'd say, "Bah!" and toss it. And then you'd read this, "Hey!" And that would go right in the middle of the room, in the circle of us. I don't know that any editors working now follow the toss it technique, but we threw a lot of stuff at the walls. And then, of course, you felt guilty and you had to go read it again. That's a good process. Sitting on the floor, eating, arguing. Nah, listen to this one. Listen to this one. Hear how she does this. It's wonderful. It's self-righteous twaddle. It's incomprehensible. It's glorious. Read it again. It isn't any good. Read it out loud. You know why our meetings went on so long? We argued. If you can't argue, you couldn't have been an editor at Conditions. You couldn't. You had to be able to stand up and fight for what you believed in. Some of us had practice. Good luck. Good goddamn luck. Don't let yourself be discouraged by the state of the world. I remember 40 years ago. You think this is hard? This is easy. This is easy. Thank you. That's enough. If you want to read what I was going to read, it's in the issue.
And thank you, Dorothy.
That was perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for coming. I want to just thank Cheryl and Shromona and all of the contributors to this issue, and say, Max, start the song. We'll stay and dance. When the song ends, I end the Zoom call. I thank you all for joining us and for being part of the Sinister Wisdom journey.
Oh, yeah.
Come on and say the L word. It's the only chance you got to reclaim our name and not live in shame to try to improve our lot. Come on and say the L word. It's the only chance you got to stop the lying and denying. And come on and give it a shot. And everybody say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on, say lesbian. Now, the last time you said the L word, did your stomach take a turn? Did you look around and see if the sound was loud enough to make the ears burn? Did you say it in a whisper, or did you just say gay? Did your face turn red? Did you decide instead to save it for another day? Then to yourself say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on, say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on.
We know there are risks involved. No oppressed group has ever gained their freedom without risk. And no oppressed group has ever gained their freedom without a visible movement. So right here, in broad daylight on the courthouse steps, I want to take today to announce the official launching of the campaign to work for fairness and justice for lesbians and gays and peace and fairness in French city
Do you
law.
think it sounds like a rare disease, a perversion, a plague of vice? All it takes is a little practice. But come on and take my advice, and everybody say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on, say lesbian. 'Cause if you can't say it, it's hard to be it. If you can't be it, they can't see it. If they can't see it, they'll deny it. If we all deny it, we're in the closet for life. For life. Yes. Silent secret red dawn.
Violence against lesbians and gays has increased every year since the start of the AIDS crisis. We still fear losing our jobs. We are denied places to live. We are here today to say enough is enough. We are ready to live as full and equal members of society, and we are ready
another.
Oh, she. Ooh.